So part of the rationale, part of why you put so many young men in unnecessary peril was for you wanted to get even. Ah, crap, I can't remember the guy's name. There is a journalist, and I meant to get you this book and send it to you because it's right up your alley. Because the title of the book is Psychosis, and it's about the COVID lockdowns. And one of the points he made in the interview I was listening to, and is uh, one of the points he made is that people are getting mad at him for minimizing or belittling mental health by using the term psychosis. And he said, I very purposefully used that word because there's nothing else to explain what we went through. And specifically, what he was talking about is that how many times in the early months of the pandemic did we get good news and people got mad? How many times did actual experts come out and point out, look, this isn't as bad. We were scared at first because this was novel. We didn't know where it came from. We didn't know the particulars of this virus. We didn't know the R naught. We didn't know the fatality rates. We didn't know these things because this is new. But now we can all breathe a sigh of relief because it's not nearly as bad as we thought it was going to be. And people got mad. Why do you want to kill grandma? I just told you it's not that bad. We should all be relieved. And this again ties back into our mental state culturally. Our crisis of comfort is what the hell is wrong with you people?
Well, it's even worse than that. Look at the Great Barrington Declaration. Because you said, why do you want to kill grandma? Okay, well, targeted protection. Da, 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 da. Oh, this is great. This we know it's aerosol now. We know this. We know that. Da, da. You want to kill grandma? It's like, oh no, no. We did say targeted protection. We want to protect grandma.
Yep. And that goes right into now for anyone who's following along, and by anyone I mean hi Scott. Um, I said last time that I was going to dig into the actual statutes of immigration law to talk further about what's going on in Texas. But this came out Friday, and this is why I had such a long rambling prologue. For half a century, we have been, and I use we on purpose because either we are a government of the people or we are not. So when our elected officials and our hired and appointed bureaucrats completely ignore, if not outright break our laws, that's on us because we are ultimately the people in charge. And for half a century, no one has been punished for brazenly and blatantly breaking our laws. And now we have an absolute crisis that is dangerously close to creating a constitutional crisis, which is what we talked about last time, and why I used the movie The Siege as an example of this could get really ugly. So the reason I use extreme language sometimes in talking about these things is because if we don't stop it now when it's difficult and uncomfortable, then we're going to have to try and stop it when it's deadly and dangerous. So the hope is, and I have not heard of any other state doing this. And we are both surprised and happy at the 20 something, is it 25 now or is it more, governors who have come out in support of Abbott and pledged or actually sent their own National Guard uh, uh, to help with the efforts in securing the Texas border.
It's 25 or more. I'll bring up the map when
Yeah,
I have the screen again. But
but
also they had the 14 governor convention here.
Right.
too. Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that. My hope is that this, especially now that as much as I wanted him to be the guy, there is the silver lining, I think, in DeSantis no longer being a candidate is the media no longer has the excuse. I still think a lot of them will just ignore this, but they no longer have the excuse that, well, this is all politics. He's a presidential candidate. We can't cover this because then that would just be giving free airtime to one candidate over the others. My hope is that now that he's no longer a presidential candidate, and so there are no longer internal Republican politics to worry about here, that other states will start following suit. Now,
Well, and just a side note, and this is actually the sentiment I feel exactly the same way amongst a lot of independent media outlets, is DeSantis was a strong governor. Then he was a presidential candidate that was bland and I can't even find the word petty. Petty is part of it because his social media push was very, very like trolly. And it was really not becoming of him. And
yeah.
now he's not a presidential candidate again. And he's back to where he was before he was a
Mm-hmm,
presidential candidate. And the thing is, had you just stayed the same, Nikki Haley would
yeah.
not even be close. I don't think he'd be beating Trump, but he would be close enough that it would have been worth staying in.
Mm-hmm,
And that's a blame internal Republican politics, but at the same time, you have to win on being you if you're
mm-hmm.
going to be the president of the United States.
Yeah. Um, Now I'm leaving the table of contents up here because this is just a preliminary first report, and so it only includes a few things here. Now it is 30 pages long, so there is a fair amount of detail on these few things. Um, but you see, there's just an introduction about the investigation, about terminology here, specifically safety and efficacy. And then the two main categories here are the risks of SARS-CoV-2 and then pandemic modeling and non-pharmaceutical interventions. So, and they state in the introduction that uh they need the basically the guideline that created the grand jury was about looking into um pharmaceutical manufacturers and their executive officers and other medical associations or organizations engaged in criminal activity or wrongdoing with respect to their involvement in the development, approval, or marketing of COVID-19 vaccines. But in order to do that, they have to start with safety and efficacy because that's going to create the definitions and the foundation for whether or not any fraud or criminal activity or wrongdoing occurred. Um, Later on in this report, and other pundits have talked about this, is that federal agencies, and the reason I highlighted this is to focus on the pharmaceutical manufacturers and other medical associations or organizations. There are numerous federal agencies that I think provably committed criminal acts. But a federal agency has the power and authority to ignore a state grand jury. The state grand jury has no power to compel a federal agency.
That, and I think there would be some bastardization of qualified immunity there as well.
Exactly. And to me, uh this reeks of protectionism of the worst kind. That we've ranted about, go back to our episodes looking at the inspector general and other reports on the FBI's investigations into Trump and all the things they did wrong. But it's okay because the FBI investigated itself and said, don't worry, we've made some changes and everything's fine now. This is like letting the mafia investigate itself. Why are we doing this? All right. Next important point. So this is about the apolitical nature of the grand jury. Once the governor of the state of Florida issues a petition, his involvement in the statewide grand jury is at an end. Once the Florida Supreme Court issues an impanelment order, its involvement is essentially at an end. The statewide grand jury's power, however, is limited to two outputs: indictments, which subject individuals or organizations to criminal prosecution based on multi circuit violations of Florida criminal law, and presentments, which address issues of great public importance for which the law does not always provide a sufficient remedy. Grand jury presentments frequently involve allegations of corruption, neglect of duty, or malfeasance by government agencies, private entities, or individuals, and are often accompanied by legislative proposals to curb further misconduct. Occasionally, however, the entire purpose of a presentment may be to raise public awareness about circumstances that should be addressed in some way, but for which our current laws are unequal to the task. All these situations share the same inherent limitation. The statewide grand jury only has the power to recommend solutions. We cannot enact them. It will be up to state legislators, federal lawmakers, or even the people themselves to ensure that our efforts are not wasted. I don't know if he's spoken about this particularly, but this is why right now, as an aside before I forget, because last time we talked about the primaries and how it was is basically done as far as we were concerned. That the presidential, you should still go vote in your primary because there are going to be down ballot primaries that you should care about. Because this is why we always get the lesser of two weevils. So make sure you go vote in the primary for those down ballot people if you can find anyone you give a damn about. But this is why RFK Jr. is my leader right now in my presidential vote, because they're not wrong. I'll talk later about how I think it's a little misguided, but this point here is important, that this is why we need a Nuremberg style trial, because because individual laws may not be sufficient in scope to cover what happened here. Because the more you dig into this, it is not hyperbole to say that what occurred here was a crime against humanity. And our laws don't cover that. Our laws cover specific acts, one individual or group against another individual or group. We are talking about multiple individuals and groups, hundreds, if not thousands of people against the billions of people in the entire world, and
Well,
specifically the 330 million in the United States.
I know it's bigger than this, but you can still treat it semi the same because
Yeah.
the let's take the analogy of like a bank robbery. You got the driver, you got the people that go in with the guns, you got the person who scoped it, you got the person who probably on the inside gave them information. You got all of these different entities that are part of one heist. And we still try them all as bank robbers.
That's why the RICO statutes were created, was to kind of fill that void and make sure that, and but to your point, there were already some laws on the books that covered that.
Well, you only
I
need one. Robbing the bank is illegal. And then you just round up everybody who was involved and say you're
so
an accomplice.
I'm brain farting on the legal terminology here, but there are already laws on the books that you can't say, well, I didn't pull the trigger. If you are part of a bank robbing crew, I mean, this is very specific law, and the two gunmen who go in, they kill a guard, you're
Yeah,
still on trial for
you get
murder.
what was the exact law? Because they were trying to charge the other cops in the Chauvin case
Hmm.
with this
Hmm.
yeah, it's some sort of secondarily involved in the murder kind of
You were
charge.
all part of a group
Hmm.
engaged in a criminal act, and if one member of your group, does something other than what the group intended, you're all culpable because you were all in on this together.
Yeah, but it even extended further than that. If you're part of the gang that's robbing the bank, the cops show up and a shootout ensues. Everybody the cops shoot, you're still responsible for.
Mm.
So it goes even further than that. It's everybody that dies in that situation you caused, not just by the group that's doing the baddie thing.
All right, moving on. This point here is the real crux of what I wanted to rant about with this. And I'm glad that this is really the focus of this initial presentment, which is most of the actions we have been asked to investigate and the people who took those actions are elsewhere. On the one hand, this complicates our efforts to compel testimony and slows down the statewide grand jury process. This is why it's been a full year since this grand jury was impaneled, and they're just now releasing their preliminary first report. On the other hand, a surprising amount of scientific and other information about the COVID-19 pandemic is readily available in the public square. The
Yes.
science hasn't changed, the politics changed. And we'll have an example of that in a second. Now, here is the specific point that was my first point here about federal agencies that drives me bananas. Unfortunately, not all our investigative efforts have been met with fulsome cooperation. Some prospective witnesses have elected not to testify, often citing potential professional or personal consequences arising from their involvement with the statewide grand jury process. I don't understand how you can get away with that. I mean, if you're summoned for the jury, you can't say, you know,
Well, yes,
my
you
my
can.
friends will get mad at me if I do that.
Yes, you can, and I don't know how to do it because I'm not a legal expert or somebody who's
No, I
made my
just went
life
through.
getting away with stuff. Because let's
Yeah.
go back to the Chauvin trial. The guy that was in the SUV with uh uh Floyd
Mhm.
was he was asked to testify and he refused to testify because he would incriminate himself on other charges. And they let him not do that.
Well, no, they didn't let him. I would guess they decided it wasn't worth it. You can compel someone to testify. A jury,
Oh,
a grand jury,
the judge made the
the
decision, but we all know where
judge.
the judge was.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not the way I thought that was supposed to work, but I guess I'll dig into that later.
That's why I said I don't know the mechanisms because I'm not a legal expert and I don't get away with stuff for a living. So
uh, grand juries and legislative committees, and this is one of the sleazy things about what some of the Republican committees have done and why it's all politics is because they're not. I forget the technical mumbo jumbo here, but basically, some of the committees that the House set up, the House GOP set up when they took over in order to investigate whether it's the COVID stuff or Biden stuff or whatever, some of these are all politics because they're not official committees. Um, Actually, the J6 committee was one of these. They didn't have official power, which meant technically they weren't supposed to be able to compel testimony and issue subpoenas. They did it anyway, and they got away with it, but technically they weren't supposed to be able to
not
do
only did
this.
they get away with it, but was it Bannon that went to jail
Yeah,
because he wouldn't show up?
yeah.
So not only did they get away with it, it was enforced by
Mm-hmm,
the executive.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, so I don't understand this one, and if someone has more legal knowledge out there to understand what's going on here, it may be, my guess is that since it is a state grand jury, they cannot compel someone outside of the state to testify.
That would
You
be the most likely explanation, I
you
would
can
guess.
you can issue an arrest warrant, and there is an extradition process if someone is out of state. But so far as I know, there is no such process for a subpoena. Um, Occasionally, prospective witnesses raise concern about the underlying fairness of this body, which, for the reasons described above, we believe to be unfounded. Similarly, Our legal advisor has sought the assistance of several agencies of the United States government, which have thus far declined to participate. The Center for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, and the U.S. Army, among others, all had a substantial hand in the contracting, approval, and distribution process for the COVID-19 vaccines at the center of our inquiry. Those agencies have elected not to provide representatives to testify before this body, and federal law prohibits us from compelling their cooperation. So let's try a thought experiment. And yes, this is hyperbolic. But then again, as I've said, the consequences of what happened here are no less serious than. So if an FBI agent walks up in broad daylight in the middle of Main Street and shoots someone at the face, the FBI can just stonewall the local grand jury and say, yeah, we'll check it out ourselves. We're not going to cooperate with you. It's the same damn thing. You're talking about serious consequences. People who had their lives destroyed, people who lost their lives. That's what this grand jury is investigating. And you get to say, based on federal law, yeah, I know we screwed over your state. And again, this is why we're talking about this instead of the immigration issue, because it's all connected. Yeah, we know we screwed over your state and we hurt people in your state, but we get to investigate ourselves and we're not going to cooperate with your grand jury. That's bullshit. That is, I think I've said this before, to paraphrase Ben Franklin, a banana republic, madam, if you can keep it.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with your analogy because where they're at now is the inquiries are to figure out if a crime was committed, whereas the shooting in the face, we know an obvious crime was committed, and is your person guilty? I think that's the difference there. I think that's the distinction there. They're in the process of, was a crime committed? I mean, I agree with you that I'm leaning towards, yes, there obviously was a crime committed.
All right, let's adjust the analogy. The FBI agent is arrested, and in his interrogation, he reveals that other agents were involved in some kind of conspiracy. And
That's
the
better. That is better.
FBI refuses to cooperate with the investigation of this conspiracy.
Yeah, that
That
would be
is
a
a
better.
better analogy of what's going on here.
Yeah.
All right, next point. The petition for order to impanel the 22nd statewide grand jury contains a wide variety of alleged misrepresentations. This is under the heading of safety and efficacy. What does safety and efficacy mean? These include assertions that side effects from the vaccines either were not established or later on were extremely or very rare, that the benefit risk profile of our vaccine remains positive. These are all in quotations, so they are citing specific examples of either pharmaceutical representatives or health agency representatives who made these statements. That the vaccines will stop, slow, or limit the spread of COVID-19, that the vaccines prevent COVID-19 disease with an efficacy of over 90%, that getting vaccinated isn't just about protecting you, but also your community, that vaccination was the key to eventually developing herd immunity. And perhaps most importantly, that vaccines were safe and effective as determined by data from the manufacturers. All of the alleged misrepresentations above, and for that matter, the broader category of attributed statements from the petition,
I'm just going to say
share
right
two
now,
primary
be careful
commonalities.
with your verbiage, because if we get a strike just for
Yes,
reading this, remember we got a strike just for playing an RFK clip last time. So
and I will note that the text I am reading verbatim is much more careful in its wording than I am, because I think there's a mountain of evidence to say lock them all up. But this is an official legal proceeding, and there are steps you have to follow for due process. Obviously so, and for good reason. And we should be thankful that due process is actually happening here, even if we think, you know, bad people may be getting away with bad things.
well, what I would caution here is, yes, you're reading this part where you're quoting the things that were stated. but don't quote this document if it says we found it not to be that way.
Well, and so,
Use more vague language that's not going to show up on AI. Like, look at the document here, what it says.
and again, it uses terms like alleged misrepresentations.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is prima facie, but you know, they're right. It has not been proven in a court of law, and right now this is still just the very preliminary stage of an investigation. Um, every statement involving risk of a vaccine or the rarity of a vaccine side effects is essentially a statement about the vaccine's safety, and every statement about a vaccine's ability to prevent COVID-19 disease is essentially a statement about its effectiveness. Because these two concepts, safety and effectiveness, form the axis around which the alleged misrepresentations orbit, we believe it appropriate that they form the primary focus of our inquiry. Again, alleged misrepresentations. The main reason I wanted to read that whole long section is, hey, Howie, maybe you should read this. Referring back to our RFK that got a strike, our RFK video of
He ain't got
how
time
is
for that. He's too busy counting bills.
yeah. Nobody said that. Nobody said that. Nobody ever said that. Nobody ever said that. Well, I can pull it up right here. Okay. I mean, no, no, no. We don't need to do that.
No, no, he was like, okay, but his little sidekick was like, no,
Yeah.
no.
No, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Um,
Our handlers wouldn't like it.
so, so again, it's all there. It was all always there. You either weren't paying attention because you didn't want to, or you're lying. Um, and I don't mean about the alleged misrepresentations. I'm talking when I say lying there, I'm talking about the narrative and those who perpetuated the narrative. Again, the science didn't change, the politics changed. All right, now here is something that really sticks in my craw. So let me hold on. All right, so significantly, the concepts of safety and effectiveness are long established principles in the world of federal drug, device, and biological product approval. All right, so this is, I think, what they're doing here is they're tying back. This is why they started with, look, grand juries don't always come out with um, a criminal warrant, right? There isn't always a criminal indictment because sometimes the law is not sufficient or the law doesn't cover something that happened. And I think this is a main reason why they wanted, besides just that that's true, I think this paragraph here is a big reason they wanted that preamble of we might not be able to offer any criminal indictment because the,
I like the
they're
wording. They're considered words of art.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh,
Because all of those things that they quoted there were public statements. They were not technical uh, reports. Okay. So the FDA, in its approval process, safety and effectiveness have very specific technical meanings. And so what they're doing here is they're already telling you what the defense is going to be, whether it's a criminal defense or a public relations defense. The defense is going to be, well, we were using those terms colloquially to inform people. We weren't using those terms technically. Okay. Uh, in, in fact, they form the primary goalposts of the FDA's approval process, meaning that every pharmaceutical manufacturer who submits applications to the FDA for new biological products, including vaccines, sets out to establish through clinical trials and other means that their products are safe and effective as the FDA defines those terms. However, both safety and effectiveness are considered terms of art, meaning that in this specific milieu, they have definitions that are similar but not identical to their conventional plain language meaning. Here is why this pisses me off. And I've said this before, but I don't know that I've said it on while we were recording. The biggest problem with our legal system is that we have a legal system. We don't have a justice system. I actually think I may have said this because I think I cited Dennis Miller's rant on lawyers. And the punchline is it's no longer about who's right and who's wrong. It's about who has the least clever lawyer. That's who ends up losing.
Which is funny because a an industry based on having perfect language argues the language every time.
Mhm.
Oh no, this is actually, I would chalk their defense. If I was Trump's lawyers for Jan 6, I would be taking every defense like this and just putting it together in a 55-hour presentation to wear out the judge and jury. It just, oh, you're citing the word fight in what I said. I said, peacefully march, but fight like hell. And you're saying this. No, no, no. This was colloquial language. This
Mhm.
was, but no, no, it's not colloquial language. You said the word fight. Well, when they said safe, you said it was a form of art. I was being a showman. I was up there being a personality. I was on The Apprentice. I was in the WWE.
Well, this is this, and then the next point I'm going to highlight here is why I have a smidgen of hope that this is all setting up a criminal case. Because remember, the impanelment, the primary focus of this is supposed to be fraud, because you can't you cannot sue a manufacturer for malpractice because they have immunity based on what I think is pretty terrible law. But if they were fraudulent, you can sue them for that. And this is where my smidgen of hope is that they're setting up what they expect the defense to be in order to tear it down, which is it doesn't matter if you weren't using those terms in the technical FDA way, because you were making these pronouncements in the public sphere to sway the public, and they were wrong. Or allegedly, what we're looking into is, were those purposefully misleading? Were those fraudulent in the legal term, in the by the legal definition?
But you know who can be sued for malpractice? Doctors. And everybody who was injured by certain things should be suing their doctor who recommended it. And when the doctor says, I was going by the information I had, then bring every document into the trial. And these lawyers should just get together and just have a team put it all together. So a blanket approach to this, because it would take a team, a large team, to put it all together. Every document that was available that they ignored because they wanted to go with the narrative.
Mm-hmm. And that leads right into this point, because I think I think this is here to again tear down that expected defense, which is, even by the technical FDA definitions, this ain't right. Because, however, it should also be apparent that establishing the safety of a biological product necessitates a comprehensive, meaningful, and accurate evaluation of the risk presented by the disease that product is designed to address. This is especially true in the case of vaccines, because they are being administered to healthy people, not the afflicted, in the hopes of preventing or mitigating a disease they do not have. Now, the long prologue to that is they used as an example cancer drugs. Cancer drugs are basically poison.
Mm-hmm.
Your doctor is giving you poison. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, because the disease you have is worse.
Yeah, to describe cancer drugs, I want to be a fly in the wall of the person who first brought this up. It's like, hey, what if we radiate people to the brink of death, but not quite dying? Would the tumor die first? That's basically how cancer drugs work.
Yes. So, and that's what they meant by safe and effective is something of an art form, because it depends. Um, Another example they give that I didn't highlight was using um, trial. How you set up a legitimate trial is, you wouldn't set up a trial for do parachutes prevent you from going splat? Okay, because in order to have a trial, you would need a control group and shove people without parachutes out of an airplane. That is not only grotesquely immoral, it's also stupid because we know just by common sense and looking at it, oh yeah, those people are going to die. So we don't need that.
I mean, you have non-human trials for that kind of thing. You could throw a rock with a parachute and throw, or a watermelon with a parachute and a watermelon without.
Today we're teaching poodles how to fly.
Oh, no,
Let's
I
go,
said a
Fluffy.
watermelon.
If you haven't seen the movie UHF, you need to go watch it because it's a cult classic.
All
It had
right,
the
quick pause
okay.
here.
All right, a little pause there because since we're talking about uh, seasonal illnesses, I need to stock up on my vitamin C and vitamin V. It's also very important. Anyway,
And
a
ladies,
screw.
so is vitamin D.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
screwdriver is orange juice and vodka, right?
Yep.
Pineapple juice is so much better, though. I don't know why that. It should be pineapple juice.
What's the official name for that? I can't remember.
I felt like there was one, but all I could think of was screwdriver. And I was like, no, that's orange juice.
No, that's orange juice.
Okay, so just to put a pin in the point we were on is I'm hoping so grand jury proceedings are secret. So we don't know who has been called. We don't know what documentation they're looking at or who is testifying before them. But I think it's safe to assume that all this trial data that was it last year that a judge said, no, you can't keep that secret for 75 years and started releasing all that stuff. I suspect that's part of what they're looking at. And I think that that last bit that we talked about is part of what they're talking about there. I want
Call it pineapple vodka cocktail.
to fine.
I mean, like if
Simple
anything
enough.
should have a cool name, that's one of the ones that should.
Yeah. All right. So jumping along to a few highlights here. The reason I highlighted this is because they're talking about the true seriousness of the pandemic. How bad was it actually versus what people said? Um, and so the R naught, which if you followed along and you're interested in this mumbo jumbo, I shouldn't have to explain R naught. On January 30th, 2020, for example, so this is really early on, the World Health Organization estimated the mean, average, and median midpoint R naught for COVID-19 to be 3.28 and 2.79, respectively. The WHO, great band, shit organization, because it's an organization full of supposedly very smart people, and yet they don't know that Taiwan exists. Curious.
I don't know if that could get us banned.
They
Just
they also praised in their kind of their policy proposals, they praised China's very totalitarian and authoritarian and straight up evil response while recommending that to other nations. So there's one group we could look at, or and the other reason I highlighted this is I had completely forgotten this happened. In February 2020, a study of passengers on the Diamond Princess cruise ship found the R naught to be 2.28. And I'll come back to that later. That pops back up again later.
well, the main point there is it's lower than the estimates,
Mhm,
and it's a confined environment where everybody's locked together
uh-huh.
in the same air system.
This was one of the first, because remember the first few months, this started for anyone who was paying attention, this started to come up in November of 2019. Actually, there started to be, hey, something's going on in China. There's some sort of new epidemic is going on before it started to really get people's attention. And the cruise ship was one of the first big things that got people's attention in the West and made Western media start paying attention to this and made people start freaking out because, yeah, to your point, this is a very confined place. A lot of old people take cruises. And so this was a tinderbox for a respiratory virus to spread. Um, and there you had much like with Italy and then later Sweden, you had real world data that was completely ignored because it didn't fit the narrative. And instead, they used models that didn't represent the actual real world data in places like Italy and the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Um, this this section is making the point that the numbers were very problematic, shall we say, because of the CARES Act. Both now, I'd forgotten this part too, because this brings up a lot of old history that so much crap has been piled on that we forget. Not only were hospitals getting a subsidy based off of case reports, but then next of kin were getting a death payout. So there
So it
were
was in the hospital and the patient's interest
mhm,
to go along with getting along.
mhm.
That
And
okay, that actually is something that is in the next topic for me. Like I'd say, let's get through this because I can talk freely about the next topic.
mhm. So it talks about um the incentive to inflate these things. Um and part of the problem is, how are you figuring the numerator, how are you figuring the denominator, and that's going to give you a number. And the director general of the WHO in March of 2020 made a statement that the media ran with and was very incendiary. And they kind of excused the director general. I don't, because I say you don't get to be in a position like that
And be
and be a
careful
moron.
quoting here. I don't know what you're going to quote,
That's why
but
I'm not quoting it.
okay,
That's
yeah,
why I'm
because
just
I was going to
leaving it
say
there for you
it
to read.
specifically says in the guidelines contradicting the WHO.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
Well, I was uh who was I listening to the other day who was talking about this and made the point that back in March of 2020 or May of 2020, somewhere in there, they read a New York Times article and they got fact checked for just straight up reading a New York Times article, because the fact checkers don't want to fact check the New York Times and say the New York Times is wrong, but they will fact check you if you read it. Same thing here. Um, okay, I better not read that note.
yeah.
That I have there. But the point being, the numbers were not what was being said by public health officials, and the scaremongering was used to push the things that it's about to get into, which is the non-pharmaceutical interventions. Um, Specifically, walking around like you're about to rob a bank in the old west. I don't even know if I can say that word. Of walking, and then the not going anywhere and staying at home. There, I won't use the key terms, even though we're already probably banned.
Well,
And
yeah,
again,
I'll put a disclaimer when we switch
yeah.
topics, just in case I
So
have to clip the video to
yeah.
get it on. Yeah.
So the point of all of this number data is, hey, once again, remember Italy? Remember the Diamond Princess cruise ship? Pepperidge Farms remembers and wants to build a gallows. I probably shouldn't say that. Um,
We have to be consistent. The state can't have that kind of power, Heath.
yeah. Um, all right. So that was all the setup for why initially the uh they're looking. This first report is looking at the pandemic modeling and non-pharmaceutical interventions. Okay. So after all of that groundwork, now, okay, knowing these numbers, knowing the actual science, not the science, why did we do these two things in particular? Okay. And these two things that I won't say out loud. Why did we do these things and what were the effects? Okay. And and I love that they even use the term memory hole because there was a lot of stuff going on, and I love that they don't name him by name, but they mention, is this where it's at? Um, well, they do reference a wealth of contemporaneous scientific information already existed in major publications that could have informed a much more robust and meaningful response with respect to MPIs, but much of it was ignored or even attacked by mainstream public health and media entities. Again, the politics changed, not the science, and there were collateral consequences, which they go into, and specifically on this thing, I love that they don't mention the director of NIAID in early 2020 said that uh, being an Old West bandit would be ineffective in mitigating the certain things happening, only changing his opinion later to match newly published federal public health guidance. This is saying straight up, and the reason I quote this specifically is because and this is what was said at the time is we are following the new public health guidance, the new public health recommendations. You're just saying straight up this isn't the science, this is politics. Because this is a political entity, it's a governmental entity issuing a guideline. Nowhere in here are you saying we have done this study, and they do go through and they point out some of these studies that were done and how grotesquely flawed they were, how hilariously flawed they were. And this is, oh, there we go. Um, and this is so jumping to the conclusion here, and this
Well,
is where
let me add a little something in between the conclusion here. What you just said, because it's not just politics. So this is from the neuroethics enabling neuroscience and advances in society document. This is something I highlighted and it really bothered me. Neuroethics must be able to facilitate good neuroscience and also ask hard questions about when innovative neuroscience does not align with societal values. And this is the kicker here, and the people funding it. This is in their official neuroethics document.
okay, sure, why not?
Is that UNICEF, by the way, or
He who shall not be named.
yeah?
All right. With respect to, there does exist a pattern in the data showing a short-term stabilization of case growth that persists until the is lifted, followed by months or even years of excess mortality that can be partially be attributed to collateral consequences concentrated in the groups at lowest risk from the thing. There is a case to be made that these things enabled others in high-risk groups to bridge the gap until 2021 when they had access to jabs, a subject which this grand jury will undoubtedly examine in future presentations. On the average, however, when one includes all age groups, this was not a good trade. Oh, you mean, in other words, what the Great Barrington Declaration said, which is, hey, this is not how we have ever responded to something like this. We should be focusing on the at-risk group. And oh, something else that I'd highlighted there, and I didn't want to quote directly because we're already treading on thin ice here, is that something interesting that I knew but hadn't thought of specifically, if you look at the data, is that one of the things we were worried about early on were comorbidities, which kind of the obvious things of, well, it's a respiratory disease, so you got to worry about things like asthma and whatnot. The cytokine storm thingy is basically an autoimmune response. So if you have an autoimmune disease, well, it turned out once all the data was in and you look at it, comorbidities don't really matter. Age is what matters.
Well, age is a comorbidity,
But yes,
but realistically, of all those things you named, The two top ones, which we're not allowed to talk about, but I'm going to because we've already tread thinner ice than this, is age and obesity.
Mhm.
Those were the top two. All the other ones became secondary things, and a lot of those secondary things were products of obesity and age. You know, a lot of chronic disease we can actually chalk down to, you know what, we're living a lot longer than we did 150 years ago.
Yeah.
So I mean that's just the if you live long enough as a guy, you will get prostate cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
That,
it's
that
gonna
was
it's gonna
when I heard
happen.
my doctor told me that I was shot. Wait, what? He's like, yeah, that's just the way it works.
Yeah, so realistically, those first two not only were the biggest comorbidities, they're associated with almost every comorbidity that follows,
Mhm.
except for maybe some congenital conditions.
All right, now I asked you to pull up a video as an illustration for the overall point of this stuff was known at the time and people were saying it at the time, including an actual freaking doctor. Not just an actual freaking doctor, but unlike the doctor that he's talking to, Rand Paul is still a practicing doctor. He doesn't practice as much because he's kind of busy with his day job, but he still sees patients. He still goes to third world countries and performs procedures for as part of charitable work. So
And I did, just so nobody like says we're biased here with our sources. This is MSNBC, and look at the title. I challenge that. Fauci shuts down Senator Paul.
yeah,
So you watch this video from a conservative source, and they're like, Paul grills
yeah,
Fauci on subject, and MSNBC is Fauci shuts Senator Paul down. But you
mm-hmm.
get the same damn thing. So
Mm-hmm.
the setup here is Paul asks him about New York and then their high death rate and why are you proud of New York? And it's because this current time, if let me move us here, you can see the map at the current time, their rates aren't as high as like Texas. But this is also at a certain time of year where Texas would have more flu and would have more all of
Yeah,
the
you're also again look at the headline there. New cases in the past 14 days.
yeah.
Cases.
So
And we already talked about why those numbers are problematic.
yeah, and the issue here is uh I'll just play it from here because I think Paul comes in and says what his thoughts are after this. So Fauci is saying this is why New York is lower now when we start this.
No sound.
Oh,
Bad Samo.
dadgummit. Sorry, amateurs.
Yeah, we only have 250 episodes. We still don't know what we're doing. Okay, boomer. All right.
All right. You ready?
Mm.
Oh, son of a.
Don't open your porn drive. That would be embarrassing.
Not on this computer. This is my work computer.
1% or less is because they are looking at the guidelines that we have put together from the task force of the 4 or 5 things of masks, social distancing, outdoors more than indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
Or they've
Two things. So first he's saying that their test positivity is lower because of those things, which Paul is going to rebut here in a second. But also the third one of those, what was it?
Washing hands, wasn't that the last thing he
Uh,
said?
no, yeah, but the one before that,
Let's see. He said washing hands, avoiding crowds, uh
being outside more than indoors.
outside more than inside. But
And
you can't go
remember,
outside or you'll get arrested.
this is still during the time they're arresting people for surfing alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to point that part out.
developed enough community immunity
Right.
that they're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that, Senator, because I want to, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You were not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York, it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
Pause real quick.
There's also the pre-existing immunity of those who have
I you know what jumped out to me about his response, besides the fact that he's an annoying twat, is he called him Senator Rand. You would call him, the senator from Kentucky, or Senator Paul. So I don't think he's using senator as an honorific to be polite. I think that was a dig. You're just a senator. And that's why, and I didn't even know what clip you were going to pull up, but remember, he's a practicing doctor. You're a bureaucrat who happens to have a medical degree.
Yeah, that, and this it's a flawed statistic what the CDC put out.
Which is, I'm guessing, what Dr. Paul is about to say here.
No. In
No?
fact,
Okay.
I think he loses the narrative a little bit here. So maybe he does get shut down. But that 22% was people that had COVID during that first giant flashing wave that went through New York. We don't know the denominator because you needed to do prevalence. You needed to do a large sample of New Yorkers and take a little blood and look for antibodies. But they never did a seroprevalence study to get these numbers.
So, and one of the things in the grand jury that I skipped over while I was trying to hurry along is they cite when was it that the CDC itself came out and said, based on seroprevalence studies that they had done, that they estimated, I believe it was 75% of everyone under the age of 18 had it at least once.
Yes, it was something large like that.
It was a huge number.
Now, this was a consideration, but I don't think it was a strong argument.
Cross-reactivity, which is about a third of the public, and many estimates from studies, which would actually get you to about two-thirds.
I'd like to talk to you about that also, because there was a study that recently came out that pre-existing immunity to coronaviruses that are common cold do not cross-react with the COVID-19.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC.
Shut up, Chris.
MSNBC.
All right. But so the problem with the study he was talking about there was it studied cases. And we all know that you could still get COVID if you could still get a regular cold if you've had the cold before. So that was flawed in itself. Did you get some form of beneficial immunity from those previous cold strains? We don't know because they never studied it.
All right. So my final point on this, the reason I keep bringing up Nuremberg is because, one, as I said, it's illustrative of how the scope of what happened here, what was done to people by people who had the knowledge and had the expertise to know better and know what the potential, as the grand jury report put it, collateral damage would be. But there's another reason I keep bringing it up, and that is my point about legal system versus justice system. Technically speaking, the original Nuremberg trials were illegal. There was no legal framework to do what they did, but it was justice. The allied governments created a framework, they issued a directive, and they set up what really wasn't, technically speaking, that was an extra legal court. Technically speaking, that would be like you and I getting together and declaring that, I better not use any names here, but let's say one of the individuals in the video we just watched, declaring him a criminal, abducting him, and then, going to a barn out in the boonies and holding our own trial. And we could have all the due process we want. We could allow him counsel. We could create a panel of jurists, which is because there was no jury. It was a panel of judges in Nuremberg. That's what they did in Nuremberg. It's not any different than that, but it's just that it had the auspices of legitimacy because it was created by official governments. But again, technically speaking, there's no legal framework to do what they did.
Well, you can go back further. The Constitution was illegal. It was a bunch of people that got together and said, this is the way we should do things, and to screw the people who technically are our rulers. And now let's fight them.
Or the Declaration of Independence, for sure. That was an illegal act.
Yeah, because the Constitution was after we won, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Declaration of Independence. Yeah, you're right.
That is why the preamble, and the part that everyone knows is the preamble, the philosophical language of the Declaration of Independence, where that is why they are making a case, because they are trying to establish a legal case for revolution. Because after they give that philosophical ideal, they had, there's a list of grievances, and people don't remember that part. You need to go back and read that list of grievances of specific actions taken by the crown that, as they say, violated their rights as English citizens. I don't know that it's possible, but again, the reason I started off with this long-winded prologue about the failure to learn from history in World War II and how that bled over and created consequences later, and why this ties into what I was going to talk about, which was the immigration issue. Because for half a century at least, we have been brazenly ignoring or flat out violating our immigration laws, and no one has ever faced a consequence. And now look where we're at. So same thing with this specific issue. If the people who did this do not suffer a consequence, do you think they're just going to say, oh, well, glad we got away with that one, let's go about our lives now? Or do you think they're going to do it again, and only next time it'll be worse?
Well, one person in question hopefully is too old to do it again. He's getting up there and he finally retired. But no, you're right. People like Daszak, for example, they are already doing it again.
Yeah. Oh, was he involved in that mouse study? The one that created
I don't know.
the one that created basically SARS-CoV-3, only worse and 100% fatal in the humanized mice they injected it in?
I do not know.
That's a great idea, guys.
Supposedly not, he's not supposed to be doing that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of supposedly to my statement there. So I don't know. And I don't want to get a defamation lawsuit by saying any way, shape, or form one way or the other.
Well, along those lines, I don't know if you saw, but Rand Paul was on Tucker Carlson several weeks ago. I saw clips of it on Russell Brand's show on Rumble, and he's pimping this new book. And the thing, the thing Brand was focusing on was talking about, basically 2020 to 2022 and what was going on there. And again, what we've been rambling about and ranting about here, which is we knew all this stuff then and it was ignored. But the thing that blew my mind is how many times Senator Dr. Rand Paul said, I have requested this or that from these federal agencies, and they have either ignored or straight out denied. Who works for who here? Again, a banana republic, madam, if you can keep it. We do not live in a free society if our elected officials who have oversight of these federal agencies can just be ignored by these federal agencies and nothing happens.
I want to segue that to another medical conversation. I know we're going quite a bit long here, but
yeah, but I wanted to do a deep dive into that because I don't know how many other people are going to, and I think it's important to dig into that. And again, it's not the specific issue, although that is infuriating and makes me want to say stuff that will get us banned. It's bigger in its implications to where we are culturally. And that's why you want to talk about a specific thing, because it's interesting, it's important, and as you said earlier, we can talk about it more freely.
It's a direct parallel, but we can talk about it more freely. Let me pause this for a second, collect my thoughts, and